Now, speaking of vaccines, after effectively volunteering to act as lab rat for the world, studies on Israel proving that the mRNA COVID vaccines work, and they work pretty well, which is a fact that's now also backed by the 2 billion other people who've been inoculated around the world, with over 5 billion doses. One big question is remaining, though. What about the long-term side effects? Well, medical experts in Israel have been telling the Jerusalem Post that there is no true reason to think that there ever will be any significant long-term effects. And so my question is, how do we know? Joining me to discuss is Director of the International MA Program in Public Health from the University of Haifa, Professor Manfred Green. Professor, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, speaking with Jerusalem Post, several doctors and professors are alleging that, quote, there is no evidence of something happening unless it happened in the first 2 months, 2 hours, weeks, etc. They add that we do not have any other examples in which the immune system decided to suddenly react to a vaccine that was given years prior. Is this proof that there aren't long-term effects?
I think that we really have to look at the evidence, and the evidence is both biological and it's historical. So the biological evidence would be what kind of long-term effects could we expect? And of course, the historical is, do we have evidence of actual vaccines having had long-term effects that were only detected a long time afterwards? The biological side actually says that you're basically injecting something that is very similar to the disease, to the virus in this case, but it's a killed form, or in this case, it's a form where we actually just generate the antigen, the part that will stimulate antibodies. So in other words, there's nothing unusual about it. When people keep talking about the mRNA, but actually when you inject a virus or a dead virus or a live virus as part of the other vaccine, they also have mRNA in them. That's part of their makeup. So it's not an unusual kind of situation. But the question really now would be, do we have any vaccines that we know of that have been used that have actually either continued to be used or withdrawn because of long-term effects? And really, it's almost impossible to think of them. The only one I can say was suspected was measles, which is a live vaccine, where there was a possibility that because it caused some kind of modified illness, it could in the long term produce something that measles in the long term very rarely can do, what called SSPE. But this is a very rare thing, and it was never shown that the vaccine does that. So in fact, we don't have any historical evidence either.
So is it common, though, going back to what I think the heart of the first question is it common for drugs' long-term effects to present relatively immediately after being administered, or do drugs really do need years of study to find out what the long-term effects may be?
Okay, I'm pleased you use the term drugs, because we really have to distinguish between drugs and vaccines. They're completely different. So if you ask me about drugs, they can have long-term effects, and we, both of us, know of them, and we can describe many, some that were unexpected in the long term. But these are not drugs. These are vaccines, and that's quite different. You're not actually injecting chemicals or any kind of substances that are going to have long-term effects. These are very much simulated viruses or bacteria that will produce antibodies in your body. So it's very close to what we get exposed to naturally.
All right, so why do you think, and this may be a more political question than you're used to, but why do you think vaccines are such a target for public scrutiny and rejection, as opposed to modern medications and treatments? Why do people insist that vaccines be tested for years and years and years, as opposed to, say, aspirin, or for that matter, OxyContin, and other such medications?
I think the answer really lies in the fact that we give vaccines to healthy people, and we give drugs and medications to people who already have an illness, or we're trying to prevent an illness because we suspect that it might occur. So we're really saying here we're taking healthy people and we actually injecting something into them. By the way, I use the term injecting deliberately. I wonder if people would feel the same way about an oral vaccine, because there is something mystical about injecting. But basically, it makes no difference to the body for producing antibodies if you inject it or you swallow it. It just depends where it comes into contact with your immune system. So I think that's one of the main reasons why people, and in fact, again, we don't really test vaccines for dozens of years before we use them. There is a long process of development, but at some stage we give it to the public, and we still really don't know what will happen in a large population until we give it in the large population. And we really look for short-term side effects. When I say short-term, because that's really where we'll see them. When I say short-term, a month even. And the other is obviously the efficacy. But, and of course, we have vaccines in use now for, I don't know, 60, 70, or maybe hundreds of years. And we haven't really detected anything dramatic. The only one I can think of, and again, it didn't have long-term effects, was the smallpox vaccine. And that's an interesting example because it was routinely given to the population until the 70s because it's a very severe disease. But the vaccine had some very severe side effects. But we tolerated them because we knew it was preventing a very severe disease.
All right, Professor Manfred Green, thank you for joining us and for your insights again.